Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Daniel.
All right. Hey, thank you. Howdy. Howdy. It's a little cramped quarters.
It is.
Now you guys know how I feel, fat guy in a tiny coat. First and foremost, I just want to thank Mike for helping organize this. Thank you very much, sir. It's been a hot minute since I've been in College Station to speak. I was here at the True Texas Project meeting not too long ago. And then before that, I'm fine for now, but they're concerned about my temperature, but what they do not know is tonight I came to preach. So we're going to have a good one tonight. So tonight, we're here really at the threshold of a historic moment. And honestly, when the scheduling came down to do this, they asked me. I said yes because I have a hard time saying no. But it was really a big question about where we would be in this process of the TEXIT petition campaign. How many of you here have signed the TEXIT petition? Well, good. That means you guys get some news tonight. So, for those of you who have not signed it or who are looking at me like a clock half struck, I'm going to take you on a little journey back into the haze of TNM history. So back in 2005, the organization was founded to secure and protect the political, cultural, and economic independence of Texas. You know, we believed from that very beginning that the best people to govern Texas were Texans and not 2.5 million unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., right? Right. Very simple proposition. Now, granted, when we got out to promote the idea of Texas becoming a self-governing independent nation, people would react, the opposition, people who love the establishment, who have bathed one too many times in the waters of the Potomac River, would scream like somebody threw water on the witch in The Wizard of Oz. I mean, you want to talk about hyperbolic pearl clutching that would earn you a guest spot on a Bud Light label, that was them. But what we found is that as loud as those people were in their opposition, they were the minority. We just had to go and make it happen. And understand that we knew from the very beginning that this was going to be the equivalent of rolling the biggest boulder you could ever imagine up the steepest hill you could ever imagine. We knew this because when we looked around the world at 140 other countries that gained their independence since World War II, that it was never done easily. It was never an easy process. Now, while we have a tendency to look around the world and see these things happen, and generally by the time it hits the news cycle over here, within 48 hours it's done. But that's not how the real world works. You want to know for a fact, one of the founders and framers of the United States said that it is, you cannot be expected to be transported from tyranny to liberty on a feather bed. We knew it was going to be hard. All things that are worthwhile are hard. But yet we saw this movement grow. And every single action that we have taken has been to put us one step closer to Texas becoming a self-governing independent nation. Amen. Now that said, in 2015, we attempted something that no one had ever attempted before. You see, we knew how important it was to give Texans an opportunity to vote on a very important question. Should the state of Texas reassert its status as an independent nation? Now, I'm sure you're not amazed by how much alarmist behavior comes from people that are opposed to even the people of Texas having a say on the issue. I mean, imagine for a moment, you're a Texan, you want to be able to evaluate how you're being governed. You look at the elections and you're basically given a choice between castration with a rusty steak knife or a steak knife that is rusty.
Let me think about it.
On your ballot, there will be John Jackson and Jack Johnson. But when it comes to an issue of fundamental governance, the re-evaluation of our relationship inside this federal union, it is the most fundamental question that you could ask a people. Do you want to continue to be a part of a system that intentionally acts to collapse your border with a foreign nation, that has effectively turned control over your southern border to narco, terrorist, drug, criminal gangs? Do you want to be a part of a system that unabated will continue to heap debt, not just on you, but on future generations, your children, your children's children, until we are bankrupt, not just economically, but morally bankrupt? The ability to ask ourselves and evaluate that relationship is what the political establishment does not want you to do. You see, here's what we know. We've been advocating for this for a very long time. And we understand that if the people of Texas are given the option between self-government or a system that produces President Piddlepad, some of you will think about that later and it will crack you up, and that gang of malcontents and reprehensibles in Washington, D.C., you will rightly ascertain that the best people to govern Texas just happen to be Texans. Am I right? The establishment knows it too. So everything we have done moving forward is to move us one step closer to giving the people of Texas that choice and that decision. So in did you say louder? No one ever tells me louder. That is so weird for me to hear. Wow. Look, hey, I got a soundtrack. That's cool. I'm all right with that. Hey, look, it could be a whole lot worse music coming out from behind me, right? But in 2015, we utilized a never-before-used provision in the Texas Election Code that allowed voters by petition to place a question on a party's primary ballot. Now, for those of you who think that's odd, let me just tell you, Texas is not what you would classify as an initiative and referendum state. You know, you hear a lot of times, Colorado, California, all these other states, voters get together, they get a petition, and they put a proposition on the ballot. That when that proposition goes on the ballot, it goes through the process and eventually can become law. Okay? So those things are what you would call legally binding citizen initiatives. But here in Texas, we don't have anything like that at the statewide level, which is why I always loved to go through my inbox and read the hate mail of, why can't you get this on our ballot in November? Well, that's called the law, folks. Because let's be honest, I've been at this personally since 1996. If I could get it done any quicker and go about my life, I would love to do that. Trust me, I've got clothes that are far more comfortable to me than this. And dealing with politicians is not anybody's hobby. Nobody does it for fun. So in Texas law, there is that one limited exception where we could force a question, the question, on a ballot where people could go and have their voices heard. And in 2015, we launched a petition campaign to get it done, and unfortunately, we came up short. And we came up short because we just simply did not have the volunteers and the infrastructure to get it done. Because let's be honest, there are a lot of people out there who say, I would love for this to happen. But there are so few out there that are willing to work to make it happen. Isn't it that way with so many things that are worthwhile, folks? Right? It's just the way that it happens. But here's what I believe. I really don't believe that that was the thing holding us back. I believe that the hand of providence has a timeline for this. I believe that the time just simply wasn't right. But in that meantime, we gave the State Republican Executive Committee an opportunity to do the right thing. And they made a poor choice. And they made a poor choice by not including it on the ballot themselves when they could have done so. And what they did was, a whisper campaign was started by people in the governor's office and other political movers to say, kill it here and the issue will be dead. Just don't put it on the ballot and they will go away. They don't have what it takes for the long run. And let me tell you something right now. They haven't come up with a game to make me quit. Not one. There's no shenanigans that they can pull that will ever make me quit. Because on that day in 1996, I made a pledge to live to see this come to fruition, or until the gravedigger pats me in the face with a shovel, whichever comes first. And here's what I do know. I know I'm not the only one who has made a commitment like that. I know that as long as Texans don't have the right of self-government, there will be people there to pick up that banner and to carry it, to move forward, to get the job done. And contrary to their prophetic pronouncements that just by denying it on the ballot, that it would kill us. Excuse me. Since then, we've seen in polling the support for this issue grow from 35% to 66%. Not only have we seen that level of support grow, we've also seen the Republican Party of Texas adopt 2 planks to its platform calling for a vote on Texas independence. We've seen the Texas Independence Referendum Act filed not once but twice in the Texas legislature. And let me tell you why all of that's important. Because they told us it couldn't be done. And it just makes me think of that saying that we all have, which is, if you want something done, you tell a Texan that it can't be done. We're really bad about taking no for an answer. Texas has yet to learn submission to oppression come from what source it may. Not my words. That's the words of Sam Houston. It's grafted into our DNA to basically look at folks that say, oh no, sorry. No, you can't do that. You can't vote on independence because, well, you just don't know what you're talking about. It's in our DNA to look at those people and say, why don't you just try and stop me? You know, very similar situation to what happened when the Mexican army showed up to pick up a little bitty cannon from the people of Gonzales, right? To quote Val Kilmer playing Doc Holliday, I'm your huckleberry. So this year, we started the petition campaign again because the timing was right. We had the right people in the right time. Our numbers were larger than ever. We had that momentum coming out of the Republican Party platform. We had the momentum coming from candidates in the filing of the Independence Referendum Act. Everything was at our side, and the wind was at our backs. And so this last weekend, we showed up to the State Republican Executive Committee, and again, being good neighbors, gave them an opportunity to do the right thing, to place the question on the ballot themselves, because that's the way that it's normally done. They put those questions on the ballot. But I was also there to let them know that the Texas Nationalist Movement made history, because when that law was passed in 1985, since that day, no one has ever successfully collected the minimum number of signatures to put a question on the primary ballot. And the day before their meeting started, I let them know that we were at 102,000 plus and counting, when the bottom line was 97,709. I let them know that our people were sprinting toward the finish line. And beyond that, we had already crossed it. And beyond that, we were already running into the locker room to pour Gatorade on ourselves because we have a reason to celebrate. We made history. And here's what I'm proud to report to you. The numbers that I looked at before my tires hit the pavement, leaving Nederland, Texas to come here, show that we're going to come in over 30% higher than the required number. And that's including 30,000 people who attempted to sign the petition, but their petition signatures we found defective and are not including them. So you want to talk about the number of people that went through a legal petition process, because any of you who signed it understand that this is not some Twitter poll, do you like Elon Musk, yes or no? This is not some Facebook quiz. This is not some little questionnaire you fill out to figure out which character you are in the Wizard of Oz or the Avengers. It is a legal petition. You got to say that you're a registered voter. You got to fill in all your information. You got to put it your county. You got to go sign off on it. I mean, it is a process. It's not easy, which is probably why it's never been done before. But good news, yet again, we've done something that no one else has done. So I come to you today, really just within hours, days, of getting ready to deliver the hard work of everyone in this organization. Every Texan who signed it, every volunteer who collected a signature, every one of you that shared a link to fill that thing out and do the electronic petition, I come here to tell you, congratulations, you've done it. And I can't be any more proud to be a part of this organization and this movement. Now, let's talk about what this is and what this isn't. We're going to take this to the RPT headquarters on the 7th floor of their building in Austin on Monday, and we're going to deliver it to them. And I will tell you that the political establishment is already trying to figure out how they're going to flunk it. Because let me tell you, one thing I noticed from that SREC meeting this last weekend is this thing has got them in such a tizzy, they don't know whether to wind their butt or scratch their watch. They don't even know what the law says. They got their attorneys looking into it, but you understand that they will try everything possible to keep you from voting on this issue. And you know why that is, right? Because if it goes on a ballot, it wins. And it doesn't win by a little, it wins by a lot. And it shatters the narrative that the people of Texas don't believe in this, that it's a bunch of fringe people, that it's just a very vocal, tiny minority, even in the face of their own political party's platform that says the legislature should put this to a vote. Even when the most accurate pollster in the country polls Texans and comes back and says 66% of likely voters would vote out if this goes on a ballot. It destroys their lie. And it opens up a can of worms that they'd rather not have opened. You see, not only does it make us question in the debate leading up to the vote how Washington, D.C. is handling things, it kicks over the rocks in Austin, Texas, or as we call it often, Moscow on the Colorado, for us to see what's slithering out there too, right? We know we've got problems in Austin, beyond a shadow of a doubt. And the good news about a TEXIT vote is this. Whether it's this vote or the final vote that will come where all Texans get to vote on this thing, we know that they represent political game changers. It changes the face of politics for a generation. Here's why. Anybody here think Dade Phelan is going to continue to be Speaker after 85% of Texas voters vote for Texas to be independent? No. Do you think that anyone that stood between those 85% of Texans that turn out to the polls and their vote on independence, do you think they can politically withstand what's coming down the pike after that vote? They can't. There's no way they stand against it. You see, there is one issue and one issue alone that drives the passion of the people to make significant change. We know this because, again, we can look around the world and we can see it happen. Average voter turnout for independence referendums is 85%. When's the last time we had an 85% voter turnout in any election in Texas? You want to change the face of state government from the state house to the schoolhouse? Do you want to go snatch back control of Houston and Dallas and San Antonio and Austin from a bunch of Marxists who want us to look more like Washington, D.C. and less like every other town in Texas? This is the way you do it. No other hot button issue drives the amount of passion that this does. It is our opportunity to change everything. And while that's the much larger picture down the road for that final vote, when we get the Texas Independence Referendum Act passed and we get the final TEXIT vote where everyone gets to vote, understand that none of that happens until we get this vote. Because while votes like the one we're talking about in March, based off of this petition, are advisory only, while they may not be legally binding, they are 100% politically binding. All the elections in Texas, save for a very small number at the state level, particularly in the legislature, get decided in the primaries. That's when the decisions are made. The primaries are where it is. So what happens if TEXIT goes on the ballot and we have double the number of turnout, primarily TEXIT supporters? What does that mean in the primaries when we have pro-TEXIT challengers challenging a vast majority of these incumbents? What does that mean? That means that we get to march into the next legislative session with the first legislature ever that is very likely majority Texas first, that will 100% absolutely give us that final and binding vote on independence. That is what is at stake here. So on Monday, when I got to make yet another trip to Austin, and give myself a hernia lugging boxes, I'm doing it so we can get to the next step. The next step will be whatever fight they throw in front of us. If they want to challenge it, fine. We got lawyers too. And let me be honest, I will trust the generosity of our TEXIT supporters far above the infighting that's happening right now that's causing the coffers of the Republican Party of Texas to be on life support. Our people have taken it this far, and they will take it the rest of the way. We don't want to fight. We want them to do the right thing. We want them to just put it on the ballot. Honor the word of the people. Let the people of Texas decide. Give them the question and let them vote on it. But while we don't want to, trust and believe that we will continue to fight for every single one of you every single solitary day, as we have done since November of 2005, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we're going to honor what you want. Because even if you're here tonight just to come look at the monkey dance and you're undecided on this issue, that's okay. We're fighting for you too. If you're against this issue, we're fighting for you too. Because at a minimum, the people of Texas should be heard on this issue. If they think that it's fringe, if they think that no one believes in it, then put it on the ballot and shut me up for a generation. But I believe in the people of Texas. I believe that each and every one of you should have a say in your future, and God knows we don't have one right now. We've gone from having elections to selections, where the candidate that can siphon the most money from dark money PACs and donors from outside of state is the greatest predictor of election outcome in Texas. And it's time to break the back of the political establishment and do what Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution tells us. All political power is inherent in the people. I don't know what you're going to decide. Ultimately, when Texans go to the polls and vote, I don't know what you're going to decide. I have a pretty good idea. I mean, you're at a Cooper's barbecue on a Thursday night, listening to this guy, preachery time. And I don't know what this republic's going to look like on the other side. But I have enough trust and faith in all of you. The people that are without a doubt the most passionate, the sharpest, the most engaged. I believe in you. And I believe that you are on the precipice of being able to show to the world what a free and independent people can do. We're the 8th largest economy in the world. We have more manpower, more tech, more Fortune 500 companies. We've got more. We got more assets and value than Carter's got liver pills. Those people who looked and I could see who knew what that was. You're old, just like me. But I fundamentally believe that our time is now. It's time to push forward. It's time to make Texas independence a reality. Because frankly, folks, the alternative is an absolute horror show. We are Houston's army on the eve of San Jacinto. The ferries and the boats are burned. There is an army in front of us, and there is nothing but death behind us. This is our shot to win. And we do that by doing, yet again, what the world, not necessarily the world, but what the political establishment says can't be done. And so tonight, while we are here together, I'm going to encourage you to go out there and keep up the fight. Trust me, just because the TNM has turned into a mini print shop operation in a week's time, and just because we're going to go dolly in a whole bunch of paper and a whole bunch of digital and everything else on Monday, don't let up. This is just the start. These are what are effectively the first cannon shots in the final march toward our independence. You know, it was a really interesting week this week. How many of you here know our executive director, Nate Smith? We come back from the SREC meeting, and in no time like that, he gets the phone call. His father, who was a volunteer with us, if any of you went to the TEXIT conference, you probably got to meet Michael. He died. He had a heart attack, doing what he loved. He's out camping with his family, but he died. And it wasn't too many months ago, right? Any of you who'd seen me speak before probably know that generally standing right here would be a gentleman, a fairly tall gentleman in a cowboy hat, eyeing every one of you suspiciously. That was Dan Armour. And it wasn't just a few months ago that we lost him. And I look back at all of those people that have poured their sweat and time and money and everything you could imagine, their skills into making this happen, that are not going to be here to draw that first breath in a free and independent Texas. And as much as I would like to continue to pursue independence for self-serving means, because frankly, I want to be done with it. I want to win so I can go on vacation. And while I know that many of you are motivated by whatever your particular self-interest is, understand that we also have a duty and responsibility to those who set the stage for us to win, that are no longer here with us. We have a duty to carry on in their honor and their memory. And I don't look to just the recents. I look to those who gave their lives at Goliad, those that gave their lives at the Alamo. And folks, what we're asking you to do moving forward, we're not asking you to hole up in a crumbling adobe church and fend off the entirety of the army of the Napoleon of the West. We're asking you to not be silent. Now, I know Paul over there, that's not a problem for him. It wouldn't be a meeting in College Station if I didn't single Paul out by name, just so y'all understand. That's just the way this goes down. But to do the things necessary for us to get our victory. We can win this. We are one step closer today, one giant step closer to getting it done. And with your help, and God willing, in March of 2024, you're going to walk into that polling place and you're going to scroll down that ballot. Are we doing this one again with the wheel? Do we still do the wheel, or do they have some places? You're going to go down that ballot, and down there's going to be a question. The state of Texas should reassert its status as an independent nation, for or against. And you will have your voice heard. And so with that, I thank you all again. I thank Mac for organizing this and inviting me to come. It's not a short haul from Nederland, but let's be honest. I live so close to Louisiana down in the south corner, nothing is close to get to. But I absolutely love to be here with you guys tonight. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for making this a possibility. And here's the good news. Because of you, this might not end with the gravedigger patting me in the face with a shovel. So thank you.
We've got about 35 more minutes. So.
Yeah. Okay.
So what we're going to do tonight is just go right into Q&A, because I know that if you're new to this, you have lots of questions. We will try to get as many questions answered as possible. Most of the time we don't get through all of them. Please know that you can always go to our website, TEXITnow.org. We got a lot of ways to get to our website, but those are where all the questions that you could ever possibly think of are there.
Give a backup plan when you and the violence don't make it to hospital.
I love your optimism. we are doing, trust and believe. We've got, one of the things you will find out with your exposure to the organization is our backup plans have backup plans, because let's be honest, the political establishment does not want this to happen, right? Even in this particular ballot, they don't want it to happen. And frankly, I don't trust them, because if you read my inbox and saw the hate mail I got, you'd understand. So let's just say that when I drove here, it was very careful, and I was white-knuckling it like a chihuahua crap in a peach pit. Again, that'll be one you'll lay in bed and think about tonight, and it'll crack you up. Okay, who has a question? Anyone?
What about my Social Security?
Who let him in?
Those who maybe have that question about Social Security, why don't you go through the litany of some general aspects of how the transition will take?
Because I value my mental health.
But other issues of how you handle the federal land that's here, and I think
sure.
There's a litany of questions you could probably go through without us asking.
Okay, well, look, that's a great setup. I'll get you $20 later. So the first thing to understand, oh great, now I'm going from preacher to professor. This is going to be fun. For me, not so much for y'all, because it's about to get very professorial in here. So here's how it boils down. The one thing to understand about TEXIT is it's not an act, it's a process, right? It's a process that started when an organization was founded exclusively to make this a reality. The end goal is independence, and TEXIT is all that stuff in between. It will culminate in a vote of all the people of Texas in a referendum, or pure Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution, okay? And so you've got everything in that continuum. When the vote is held and it comes back in the affirmative, literally nothing changes the next day from a legal and structural perspective, okay? So, but the thing that we have to begin to look at is after that vote, which is an expression of the political will of Texas, the measure has to be taken about where do we stand right now, which will come out in the debate ahead of the vote, obviously, and frankly, what we need to do to be a self-governing independent nation. Now, what's amazing about that gap, because many people would perceive that that is just this big insurmountable gap, that once we have the vote, it's going to be this massive transition, it's going to take a generation. It's not the case at all. Most people don't realize structurally how close we are to functioning and being organized like a self-governing independent nation. I'll give you a good example, okay? Now, we'll just start. Some nations, when they gain their independence, they start with zero military whatsoever. We already have the Texas Military Department that can serve as a framework. As a matter of fact, as the Texas Military Department has been expanded over the years, it has moved us closer and closer to that. Another one is currency, right? Most independent countries, when they gain their independence, are still beholden to whatever body they have left from an economic perspective, because they are nowhere near creating their own currency. So they continue to use the currency of the country in which they left, or they adopt a currency from another country. Typically, it's the US dollar. And some people will say, well, you have to have the US government's approval to do that, and that's an absolute lie. That's referred to in international law as an informal currency union, right? But what most people don't understand is Texas is actually about this far from having our own currency. You see, many years ago, when Texas decided to start its own Texas Gold Depository, there was and you're welcome, because that thing was going to be DOA had it not been for us mustering as many people as we could to put the pressure on the legislators to get it across the finish line. But we saw it for what it was. And what it was a step in the direction of economic independence. And so there's a provision in that legislation that literally said the comptroller had to set up a system, an electronic system of transaction denominated by deposits of precious metal in that depository. What is that? That is an electronic underlying framework that you can put a currency on top of with a stable value, right? And many things have transpired since then. There were 3 bills in the last session, and any of those 3 would have effectively converted it into a Texas currency. So
When all those got to the finish line,
I'm going to tell you.
for one senator.
Yeah, don't get me started on that. Because that same senator which we're discussing was responsible for us having to go to court in San Francisco against Facebook instead of doing it here in Texas. But that's a whole other topic. But so it's all about determining where we are versus where we need to be. Okay, so a lot of the issues that people throw up about independence, like Social Security, when they do that, most people don't realize that the receiving federal pension benefits is completely independent upon your residence in the United States. Everyone here probably through second or third relation knows some expat from America that retired and then moved right down to Mexico or moved down to Central America or moved to Europe and still continues to get their federal pension benefits, including Social Security. Here are the exceptions. By the way, Not mine. I didn't have to mine these out. I literally just went to their website. The federal government tells you all that stuff. Don't move to North Korea. Don't move to Syria. Don't move to Iran. Don't move to any of the three places in the Ukraine that are currently under contest between them and the Russians. And I think don't go to Belarus. If you don't move there, then you're okay. And the reason being is those guys are under banking sanctions and they just can't get the payment to you. But you earned it. They pay it to you. I think really the question on federal pension benefits, especially Social Security, is what are y'all going to do on Social Security when they run out of money in 2030 or 2033, right? When they can no longer pay those benefits and have to continue to pile on trillions of dollars of debt, right? So you look at this transition plan and you understand that so much of the status quo comes out pre-vote. Like one of the things that I'm looking forward to when we get this on the ballot is being able to once and for all shatter the myth that Texas is dependent on federal money, because it's a lie. It's an absolute 100% lie out of the pit of California. I heard somebody chuckle. It's a lie, because they try to include those federal pension benefits, which are not resident specific, right, in those figures. So you can live anywhere and collect it, but they want to collect that, they want to add that into the figures. But when you take that out of the figures, what you find out is that Texans are overpaying annually $103 to $160 billion. That's money that comes out of your pocket, goes to Washington, D.C., takes a 40% haircut, and then comes back to Texas with strings attached that say, hey, you got to let drag queens read storybooks to your kids or you don't get your money, right? Or you got to do whatever these strings that are attached, you have to spend it in this way. Or they force programs on us that are inefficient, that Texans could do far better, and say, cool, we're going to force you to implement this program, but we're only going to pay you 40% of the budget. You got to go back to the Texas taxpayers and come up with the other 60%, right? That's the kind of stuff that they do. And so the equivalent of that is if you went to a doctor and they sucked all the blood out of your body, they spilled about 40% of it on the floor, they put the rest of it back in your body, and they say, see, you wouldn't be alive without me. I mean, that's what that's like. So, you know, when we talk about transition, understand, and I'll just wrap it up in case anybody has any other questions. There are four things immediately that we have to deal with post-Texit vote. Constitutional issues, anything that we have to amend our Constitution to authorize us to do constitutionally to function as a self-governing independent nation. The big marquee item on that is foreign relations. As it stands right now, as part of our relationship with the federal government, the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 10, we are not allowed to engage in foreign policy or foreign relations, although we sort of already do it, which most people don't realize. But we would need some constitutional authorization for a new office to do that, okay? Changing some technical, some names. From state of Texas to republic to whatever we want it to be, governor to president, all those sorts of things. So constitutional issues. Statutory issues that flow from that, because when you have changes in the Constitution, you got to have enabling statutes that deal with putting that into practice. Then the third thing is international covenants, treaties, and agreements. There are some things that are super innocuous multilateral agreements we'll want to sign on to, things that deal with international waters, fishing rights. I mean, there's, the one that's most obvious is there's an international covenant that deals with international air traffic control. Probably going to want to sign on to that. But the final basket of what we have to deal with are the negotiated issues with the federal government, and those are the ones where we're going to have to sit down at a table, and we're going to have to play hardball with them, and talk about things like federal debt, because technically speaking, under international precedent and international law, we are absolutely under no obligation to pay a cent of that federal debt when we leave, not one penny. That's why you guys may have heard me talk about Dr. Matt Quartrip before, when he mentioned that to the Scottish government during their independence referendum in 2014, they began to talk about it. And he said, hey, it works for you guys too. He says, you guys can leave the union and send the bill to Janet Yellen. I'm like, okay, I like that. So, those are some of the ones. I mean, obviously there are a lot more than that. We cover a ton of them on that site that Daphne mentioned, texitnow.org. Oh, here's trouble.
Sorry, Daniel.
Sorry, sir, I don't take requests.
In your opinion, if we become independent, do we need a new constitution for Texas? And how is this going to be written? And are the people going to get a vote on it? What's your views on that?
Well, I thought that's what we were doing here tonight. Right after I get done speaking, we're drafting one, right? I mean, I've got some notes on a cocktail napkin if anybody needs it. No, look, and the question from a constitutional perspective is this. So, do we have to have a brand new constitution? The answer is no. We can actually amend the existing constitution because if you look at it from a structural standpoint, it's pretty close to what we would want as a self-governing independent nation, other than those particular defects and gaps that I mentioned a moment ago. Now, I will say this. My opinion on this issue doesn't matter. I just want to get us to a point where we can make that decision about how we want to handle the constitutional issue. My particular views, I will be one voice among many when that time comes. That being said, I think that in that process leading up to a final TEXIT vote, I think a lot of people are going to be super engaged with some of the problems that we've got with the current state constitution. Now, last cycle, some of you know I ran for lieutenant governor, and I kid you not, the first question I got at the first campaign stop that I made was in Corsicana, right? Was that where we were? Is that where I put in a Got a DeVito on the jukebox like 3 times? It's probably best I didn't get elected. So anyway, you got to make your own entertainment sometimes, right? But literally the first question I got was about that. The big concern between the urban and rural divide in representation here in Texas, in the sense that, while we have our 31 Senate districts and 150 House districts, when it comes to statewide votes for statewide offices and constitutional amendments, 72% of your votes statewide are locked up in about 30 to 35 counties right now. So if you live in a rural area, you are at the state level, at least for statewide governance and for constitutional amendments, being run by Houston and Dallas and San Antonio. That triangle's got it all locked up. So that is, one of the big concerns that they had, particularly about perhaps doing an apportionment for statewide elected officials. But I will tell you, there have been multiple sessions, there have been bills submitted that would address some of those perceived imbalances. But they get no progress because, let's be honest, no one wants to take on the weighty issue of opening up the Texas Constitution when we're all concerned right now with the fact that we have a collapsed southern border that's being intentionally collapsed by the federal government. Or you've got the federal government digging so far into our pockets through their inflationary monetary policy that you've got a bulk of Texans that are having to make choices between gas, groceries, and medicine, right? So the good news is we go to a TEXIT vote, that's where you're going to see the political will to re-examine some of those issues. And in that constitutional phase that I mentioned right there, that's where you're going to see that manifest. Technically speaking, it will likely be done like how it was done in the 1960s. In the 1960s, there was what was called the Deadwood Amendment. Anybody know about that, or am I the only nerd in here? Okay. There was had a commission, and they essentially went through the Constitution and found everything in the state constitution that made no sense, right? Things that were anachronistic, things dealing with Spanish land grants, things that just did not make sense. And what they did was they produced a single bundle of amendments that were cleanups to the Constitution, and they presented it in an up or down vote to the people, and it was called the Deadwood Amendments. So you could do the very same thing to the existing state constitution without having to sit down and have a constitutional convention and have everybody elect delegates and do all those things, which can be a very long process. So, that's a long answer to a short question. We're going to have to improve this imbalance somehow, folks. Oh, hello.
So I have a question. So if we have this, it goes to a vote for the people of Texas, right? We've now made it to that level. What are we going to do to secure, I guess, the vote itself, right? Because I can see the United States and all the other powers that be scratching and clawing to prevent this from happening, or not having the true Texans being the ones that vote.
Right.
So how do we prevent, or how do we secure that so we don't have an influx of people that will essentially drown out the Texans that have been here?
Great question. Obviously, since referendums, hey, I'm the only daddy that'll walk the line, Paul.
So the question is it on now? Okay.
No, it's still on.
Okay.
Out in the room.
So the question is whether or not, or I guess what our process is to secure the vote, because if it's to vote for the people of Texas, I can assume that the rest of the United States will have a reason to maybe have an influx of people who don't really live in Texas somewhere to essentially dilute the true Texas vote. And so my question is, what are we doing to secure the vote so that we don't have that problem?
It's a great question. So let me just kind of break it down based on the premise, because I think it's important for us to be able to kind of talk about the reality of what you're asking. So if an influx is concerned, I think it's important to understand what the timing looks like for this issue. So we know that we go through March. If it goes on the ballot, it wins. We then have the ability to have those candidates that are in the primaries. I think you're going to see a pretty big change in the Texas legislature this go around. I do believe we're going into the next legislative session with a lot better momentum on this issue, especially when we come out of March with a pretty hefty percentage of people that are in favor of this, okay? And especially if we can indeed at least double voter turnout, which would be far short of the 85%. So that's the lay of the land, okay? Which means that beyond a shadow of a doubt, we get the Texas Independence Referendum Act filed in the next session, which means we then have the support in both the House, which will nudge the Senate, because that's been the issue. The Senate, our Senate allies wanted more momentum on the House side before they would get engaged, but they're already lined up. So you have this opportunity to get the Texas Independence Referendum Act across the finish line. So what happens then is the vote that is called for in that legislation happens that next November. Okay, so you've got essentially a time period from May to November to debate this and do all those sorts of things. We know that our support sits at 60 to 66% at this point. For them to flood the zone with refugees and relocators, not only are they going to have to combat the fact that that would be one of the largest mass migrations internally in the shortest amount of time to ever happen in U.S. history, but they also are going to have to overcome those people that literally sell everything in where they live. They write GTT on the door, gone to Texas, because they want to be here to be part of an independent Texas. I don't know that they overcome that. The refugees that are coming, that are think like us, that vote like us, that are sick and tired of living under a bunch of Marxist governments in their failed states, they're going to come here. So the opposition's got to overcome that, and especially when so many people in so many of those states would kick us out if they were given a vote on the issue. If the shoe was on the other foot, they'd vote to send us packing, okay? So that said, the vote packing is the least of our concerns. The integrity of the ballot is our chief concern.
Also, the integrity of the voter rolls.
Well, I mean, the whole process. I mean, let's just talk about election integrity as a whole. That is a massive concern for us. And we've been working with Senator Bob Hall to work on this issue, to deal with it. Because honestly, the only way that we're going to be able to ever deal with this is to go back to paper ballots and be able to audit those elections in the way that we need to. So I'll communicate this to you guys tonight, I don't know if tonight is going to be the start of a brand new group in College Station. I would hope so. I would hope that someone in this room tonight is convicted to stand up and be a leader and help us organize this area. But I will tell you, I spoke with Senator Hall at the SREC meeting, and he told me to say that any of our groups that want him to come give his presentation on election integrity and grid security, we just shoot up the flare and he's there. So if you guys want Bob here to have that conversation and talk about those efforts with election integrity, absolutely, we can get him here to have that conversation with y'all.
The good news is we got out of Eric.
But I will tell you, so that aside, because okay, an amendment to my answer. Hang on, let me do it like the speaker. Amendment. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Guys, let me just make a stunning confession. He is my state representative. I mean, you think you got problems, right? But here's the thing about it. We have already planned for this contingency. If nothing legislatively gets done, we have a plan for dealing with it. That plan requires a massive number of volunteers, though. Volunteers that are plugged into what we're already doing. But I will say that if you want a hint what that looks like, go look at when the Serbian people were able to prevent Milosevic from stealing the vote, and they proved it, and within 48 hours he was gone. Look at what they did and understand that that is the core of our plan to ensure that the TEXIT referendum is safe, secure, and reliable. Oh, I'm sorry, sir, limit one per customer, unless you have a coupon.
Why will this not lead to a civil war like it did before?
But the last Civil War started by the Confederacy when they attacked Fort Sumter. That was an act of war. So we just don't join the Confederacy, don't attack anybody, we'll be all right, I think.
So to your point, there's a lot of reasons. What he said was one of those. Look, number one, we're in the 21st century, right? That was a 19th century situation, and it started with an act of violence, right? That provided justification. This is exactly why we are always very careful. We're very careful to emphasize that this is a peaceful political process. In fact, one that the United States has gone around and killed other people for not recognizing and representing. So that's why there's no weird extra legal vote on this. We want the Texas Independence Referendum Act filed. We want the bill passed. We want the question to be put to the people of Texas, and then let them get on TV and show that they bombed the Walmart in Houston because they didn't like how we voted. Well, guess what? Texas will be the first state to leave, but within a week, we won't be the last. And they won't have a military because half of the military believes 100% that states have a constitutional right to withdraw from the Union. And, it was only 20% opposition that took the United States out of Vietnam, 20%. What happens when you only have 15% or less of citizens in the other states of the United States that support any sanctions whatsoever against a state that peacefully votes to leave? They don't have the support to do it. And why is it not going to happen? Because it's just impractical. It'll be temporarily painful for us, but it'll be terminal to their political and economic institution, and, that's a choice for them to make.
So I watch TV. I watch TV because I have nothing to do. I'm retired. And I see checks. I don't know, a couple of hundred, a couple of thousand. On my TV going from Mexico to Texas. And it's every day. Now, I'd like to point out that I'm Cuban. I'm in the United States because somebody took our country. Right. And my grandmother said, no, Jesus, we're out of here. And that's what we did. We came to the United States. And on television, I worked for the Washington Post. I wrote for them. Don't ever do that.
No worries.
There is no control to that border.
Right.
Chinese are coming. people that I don't recognize, who are not Latino, they're not Americans, they're that. I go, who are you? Where did you come from? And it's every day on television. It's not like I'm there, counting it. That is a big ass problem, and I don't know who to address it with. Not that anybody's gonna care, I don't think, but at least maybe in Texas, since they're coming through here first, somebody here might care. I can tell you in DC, nobody cares.
No.
Unless you're on their front porch. So, anywho, think about it.
Oh, I think about it all the time. I mean, one of the, oddly enough, one of the things that has been controversial about us, I mean, is if the TEXIT thing wasn't controversial already, right? But one of the things that has been the most controversial has been our stance for over a decade, which is the only way that we can, this side of independence, deal with the border issue is to fully militarize the Texas State Guard, right? So we have the Texas Military Department. It has 3 branches, 2 of those are National Guard, but 1 is the Texas State Guard. And the thing about the Texas State Guard is it cannot be federalized, right? That's the problem with the other 2 branches is that anytime, President Piddlepad can get on there and he can federalize them and send them back home. But for us, the Texas State Guard, who answers only to the governor's commander-in-chief, they cannot be federalized. And so our advocacy has been, number 1, full militarization of the Texas State Guard. Take them away from being just a support force in disaster times and support roles, fully militarize them, open them up for enlistment from prior service veterans, right? People that have served, preferably those with combat and field experience, and then deploy them as a border protection force. And if the federal government pushes back on that, arrest them, detain them. Because if this is indeed an invasion, and by every measure it is, right, when you have the number of illegal incursions every single solitary month of a number that is greater than the number of Allied troops that hit the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, is it an invasion? When the Border Patrol comes out and says the cartels are in operational control of the border between Texas and Mexico, it is an invasion. We've all seen the footage of how militarized the cartels are getting, and the government of Mexico is essentially turning a blind eye. But the worst part about that is, so is the federal government. In fact, the federal government is doing everything they can to facilitate the problem. And I'll tell you, the politician that I heard take the most, early on, take the hardest stance was State Representative James White, back when he was in the House. He eventually became chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, but he came out publicly and said, I firmly believe that this is an intentional attempt by the federal government to destabilize Texas and destabilize our border. So we can take all these different measures as a state, but at the end of the day, the only way that we can ever secure our border and have a sane and sensible immigration policy is to do like 200 other countries around the world and become a self-governing independent nation. Because nations get to do those things. They get to set those policies. And Texans want a secure border, and we want a sensible immigration policy that makes sense for everyone. And not for bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., who frankly could not possibly care less about the national security risk, the public health risk, the public safety risk, the strain on the infrastructure. They couldn't possibly care less. In fact, I would go so far as to say they elicit a tremendous amount of joy looking at the pain that it causes us. They don't care about the humanitarian aspects of this because it suits their end goal. They want to punish Texas for who we are, of our success in spite of all of their attempts. But more than that, they want to turn it so that Texas is no longer Texas. That we are serving and bowing and scraping at the feet of Uncle Scam and totally subservient to them. So that's my take on it. And I think we got, what, did you say one more? Okay.
I just want to.
No, I thought we covered limit 1 per customer, right?
If you could piggyback on what you said earlier.
I'm a pretty heavy guy.
I know.
Piggyback on
and I keep forgetting my ignorance. I'm just a 5th grade school teacher, and I moonlight as a Twitter troll pissing off liberals. And I always get targeted by saying that us seceding is illegal, we don't have the right to do it. And they bring up Texas versus why I think it is, right? And I always laugh about that. And I think they're not very good at reading comprehension. So could you do me a favor and help me when I'm having fun trolling? Could you elaborate on what it is that gives us authority to secede and how it's not? And I visit your website lots. I read all the questions because I have lots of questions and I want to know. And so when I get to that one, I'm just not clear on, or why people have such a hard time accepting that it is legal for us to secede.
Because they're brainwashed.
But so, yeah, I guess so. But they have so many problems, and how do I articulate that or clarify what gives Texas the authority to secede without repercussions from the United States like in 1860?
Sure. I'm so glad we're ending on this one. Because unlike the Social Security question, Mr. Burton, there are few things in my life that I enjoy more than absolutely destroying the opposition argument that somehow this is illegal or unconstitutional. So for you, sir, thank you very much. So here's the bottom line. If you've been on the website, you know, but let me give a primer for everyone else. If they tell you that Texas withdrawing from the Union is unconstitutional, your answer is, cool, show me in the Constitution where. You see, Article 1, Section 10 of the U.S. Constitution lists everything states are prohibited from doing. That's the list. Article 1, Section 10. Guess what you're not going to find? Withdrawing. It's not in the list. You know, we're prohibited from coining money. There's lots of different things. Engaging in foreign policy, like we talked about a moment. I mean, there are things that we're prohibited from doing. But the 10th Amendment is very clear. Any powers not specifically granted to the federal government or prohibited to the states are reserved to who? The states and the people, right? So if it's not in that list, then it's reserved to the states to make that decision and the people inside those states. That is the Constitution. 99% of the people who are going to come at you and say it's unconstitutional have probably never picked up a copy of the Constitution. But here's the bottom line. So if it's up to the state, we got to look to the state constitution. And here's why we got to look at the state constitution. Because the state of Nevada has a state constitution, and their state constitution prohibits Nevada from withdrawing from the Union. Explicitly, it says in there that it will never withdraw from the Union. It's explicit. Well, if you have to explicitly state that your state will never leave the Union, what does that mean? Well, does that mean that it exists as something that other states can do? Sure. But it's not really about Nevada's Constitution, it's about ours. You see, Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution that I quoted just a little bit ago, all political powers inherent in the people, all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit. It goes on to say at the end, and they, the people, have at all times the inalienable right to alter, reform, or abolish their government in such manner as they may think expedient. Now, notice it didn't say a privilege. Notice it didn't say, well, sometimes under certain circumstances. It said what? At all times. And it also referred to it as an inalienable right. Why don't you think for a minute about some of your other inalienable rights? Somebody name one. Freedom of speech. How about another one? Okay, one at a time. How about, honestly, I thought right to keep and bear arms would be the first one I'd hear out of this crowd, if I'm being honest. Right? I'm not stereotyping, but, you know. Yeah, you're going to. But you understand, we think of those as inalienable rights, which means that no man or set of men or document can take those away from us. Am I correct? Right? So we know that Texans have an inalienable right to alter, reform, or abolish. That means we have the fundamental right of self-government. And anyone who tells you any different is essentially saying they're the same as the people who say, I don't care that you have an inalienable right to freedom of speech. I want to put a muzzle on what you say. Or, I don't care that you have an inalienable right to worship according to the dictates of your conscience. I'm going to tell you how to worship and who to worship, and if you don't like it, then we'll just bomb the hell out of you, right? I mean, think about what they're saying on the flip side. So we know that it's an inalienable right. So we know it's not unconstitutional. So then they will fall back and they will say, oh, well, it's illegal. Okay, cool. I want you to imagine for a moment that you get pulled over for by a cop. Cop takes you, puts handcuffs on you, says we're charging you with a crime. You broke the law, and you say, what law did I break? Well, you broke a law that says fill in the blank. Cool, I would love to see that law. Show me the law, right? Wouldn't you want to be shown a law if you're being told that a certain behavior is illegal? Wouldn't you want to know what that law is? That would be the first thing any of us in this room would do. Let me go look this thing up, right? But guess what? There is no law against a state withdrawing from the Union. It doesn't exist. Not on the federal side, not on the state side. It doesn't exist. So then what is their fallback? Oh, my favorite. Well, the Supreme Court said that states can't leave the Union. Really? Is that what they said? Well, yeah, what about Texas versus White? Yeah, cool. Have you ever read it? Honestly, and I'm not going to judge anyone, who in here has read the decision in Texas versus White? Handful. Guess what? That is more than probably the opposition combined. Because most of them regurgitate it because they had some third-rate adjunct professor from Bug Tussle Community College get quoted by the Texas Tribune. It was decided in Texas versus White. Texas versus White said states can't leave. So let me just explain to you about what Texas versus White said. And I'm not going to go through the entirety of the case because I'm doing that. That was actually a message for you, Ralph, because I know that you'll want me to dive off into the nuance and the intricacies, and we do not have time for that.
But you just did a podcast. You did do that if you want the full.
Oh,
Okay, go ahead.
I despise Texas versus White with a passion, just so you guys understand. But here's the bottom line. Without going into all the details of the case, let me tell you, do you think a decision, first off, do you believe that the Supreme Court should be able to create law from the bench? Okay? Not their job. That's not their job at all, okay? So now that we've got that out of the way, understand that when they rule on a case, they rule on the very specific matter at hand in that case, and anything outside of that is referred to as dicta. It's commentary. And so you would expect that the dicta would at least be consistent, right? So in other words, if a judge writes a ruling in a case, particularly from the Supreme Court, you would expect it to have a consistency throughout the discussion. In other words, when they're making their pronouncement from the bench, everything in there should agree. In other words, it should be clear. But here's what's interesting. Salmon P. Chase, who was Chief Justice in Texas versus White, referred to the Union as an indissoluble union comprised of indestructible states. And so many take that to say, well, that means states can't unilaterally leave the Union. Except for one thing. He says states can't leave the Union, but then he goes on and prescribes two mechanisms for which states can leave the Union. Now, they're fairly radical, revolution and consent of the states. But if it is, as he said, an unbreakable, perpetual, indissoluble union comprised of indestructible states, not only is he going to have to explain how he then prescribes two methods for it to happen, if they're indestructible states, he really needs to explain to me West Virginia, right? Because if these states are indestructible, not the states as a whole, but states individually, I got to know where West Virginia came from. I find that quite a fascinating exercise, right? So, but all of that, he based it, because it was a political case, right? It was a political decision and not a judicial one. He based it all on this. Everyone in here remember the Articles of Confederation? You guys remember that? That constitution that the colonies had when they became states. And then they had this document called the Articles of Confederation. And it was that thing that they said, man, this is not really working for us. We need to go write a new constitution. We need to leave this union from the Articles behind and go ratify this other constitution, and that's what we're going to live under, right? So Articles of Confederation don't exist, am I correct? right? That's not the law of the land. Well, that's not what Chase said. Chase goes back to the Articles of Confederation, and he finds in there two words where they mention a perpetual union. That the Articles of Confederation created a perpetual union. And though those words do not exist in the United States Constitution, he went to the preamble where it says to form a more perfect union. And he makes the assertion that because the U.S. Constitution was essentially an amending instrument to the Articles of Confederation, that somehow this new union made it more perpetual, right? That somehow if it's a more perfect union, then somehow it's more perpetual than it was before. It's ridiculous nonsense, right? But that's the gymnastics mentally that he had to go through to be able to justify his position that Texas did not leave the Union during the war, and therefore the Treasury Department didn't have to pay off those bonds like they were supposed to, right? It was a political decision. But let's just say that people are unconvinced, and they say that Texas versus White indeed prevents states from withdrawing from the Union. Here's the death blow. Because Chase's entire argument was based upon the effect of the preamble on the Union. In the 1920s, a case came out that was before the Supreme Court called Jacobson v. Massachusetts. It was a case that was ostensibly about states being able to force vaccinations on individuals. And while no one talks about Jacobson v. Massachusetts, they left it alone for the longest time until the COVID thing went down and it became an issue again. But no one talks about the biggest takeaway from that case, which was the Supreme Court ruled against the federal government in this issue by saying that the federal government can derive no powers from the preamble unless they are explicit in the document. And now circle back around to what I said about the Constitution a while ago. So the bottom line is they don't want to litigate that. The last thing they want to do is relitigate Texas versus White. It's why we're forcing it as an issue in our lawsuit against Facebook and Meta, because they happen to bring it up, essentially making that argument that it's what we were doing was promoting illegal activity, and it's like, I'm your Huckleberry, man, let's get this on. We got a chance to get Texas v. White in front of the court again. But here's the final blow. As you can tell, I enjoy this part of it immensely. But here's the final blow. The good news is we live in the 21st century, not the 19th century. Over the last 85 years, we've seen an advancement in the study, both legally and scholarly, on the issue of self-determination, and it was by necessity, right? We went from 54 fully recognized countries at the end of World War II to about 195 by the end of the 20th century. I mean, it was an explosion of nation states. So this idea about self-determination has taken center stage, honestly, since about 1945, and it's grown since then. And here's what you will find as consensus globally, including actions and treaties by the United States federal government, is that issues of self-determination are non-justiciable. They are political questions. They are to be decided by the people and not by a judiciary. And so at the end of the day, we can make this appeal to first principles if we want to, but understand that when those trolls come at you, you don't have enough characters to go through what I just went through. All you have to do is start asking them the questions. Show me in the Constitution. Show me in the federal code. Show me in the Texas Constitution. Have you read Texas versus White? Does it say this? If it doesn't say this, do we live under? All you have to do is start peppering them with questions, and they will melt like that aforementioned witch in The Wizard of Oz. Okay, that was it, folks. Thank you very much.